Good morning. So let me get this right. Today, on this last Sunday of Epiphany, before we move into the season of Lent, we have this amazing story from the Gospel of Matthew, this glorious moment. Some of the disciples, Peter, James, and brother John, go up the mountain with Jesus and behold this mystical, miraculous moment, an MMM. And Jesus is transfigured, dazzling light upon his face, shining like the sun. The prophets appearing, somehow they know it's Moses and Elijah. And then a voice that all understand somehow moves them here to the point of awe, fear. This is my son, the beloved. Listen to him. Holy moly. So I'm going to explain all this to you today. Yes. This mystical, miraculous moment. What I want to do is just sit down and smile and sing a hymn or something. Oh, Jesus also says, right? Get up from the ground, lift up your faces, don't be afraid. And then he says on the way back, let's keep this between us for a while here. No problem. Why isn't Nikki preaching this morning? There's no hope for me, but she's still honing her craft and needs to be ready for the next place. Actually, I love this gospel. I love this story. It's significant. It's in all three synoptic gospels and, assumed in the mystical gospel of John. Talking about seeing his glory in the first chapter, grace and truth. I love it because it is such a moment, such a mystical, experiential moment, heartfelt, exceptional, because it is exceptional. Doesn't this touch, like Jesus touches the disciples, doesn't this touch the exceptional part and parts of your lives? Seriously, where does God, the divine source of all life, appear for you? Where do you see or experience the disclosure, the epiphany, the manifestation of the divine grace and glory? And what does that mean to you? How do you hold it? This gospel is famous for how Peter reacts on the mountain, making booths, making dwelling places, trying to contain the Spirit. Many people preach about, I probably did too, but I think it's more about his desire to sustain it, right? To prolong it, this mystical moment. It was a soul-searing, transfiguring metamorphosis for him. The Greek for transfiguration is metamorphosis. He was completely transformed from the outside in. And this was after he made his confession, as we hear at the beginning of the gospel. He made that intellectual assent, and yet here there is this visceral confession or proclamation, a testament. I'm in, says Peter. I'm in, falling to the ground, both astounded and knocked down, uplifted and mystically humbled. Peter here is a metaphor for metamorphosis for us. Say that 5 times. A metaphor for metamorphosis for us, in our own moments of both being humbled and uplifted, in our own experiences of beauty and sacredness, of recognizing the light coming through the cracks of our lives. So I want to share with you 3 points that you already know from this gospel, a reminder of your own experience. Number 1, experience the presence. Number 2, get up Don't let fear stop you. And number 3, be careful. Take care of your soul, for the threats are real. Number 1, experience the present. Yes, let's be knocked over by the blazing light that seeps through the cracks that we experience in this life. The mystical presence of God. How? How do we do that? We do it in many ways. One of the ways I do it is through music. I want to play you parts of a song by Van Morrison, a mystical musician, a favorite of mine, a bit of an eccentric, like lots of mystics. Wasn't Jesus an eccentric? So this is the beginning of his song called Take Me Back. I'm just going to play the little bit at the beginning. And he's going through a dark moment. And he's walking by the river and thinking. And it's almost like a chant. As you know, he often repeats words, and it's like a contemplative song. Take me back to these memories of light and grace. We'll play some more of that at the end of the sermon, but Van Morrison may not be your thing, but you can hear his yearning in that. You can hear his prayer in that song. Help me understand. And he says, help me understand religion in the next verse. And if you remember, religion means to bind, the word literally, to bind. And we often forget that binding is a strengthening that leads to liberation, not containing, but liberation. Receiving the presence and being liberated by grace. So I hope we all have these mystical, magical, miraculous moments. I know we do, and I hope we're aware of them in the moment. People are different in the way they experience thoughts and feelings, both emotional and intellectual awe. But may we be knocked down and humbled, both heart-wise and head-wise, made small and illuminated, expanded at the same time. For God both anchors us and lifts us up. What are those moments for you? Are they family? Are they friends? Is it when you're alone with nature, with music, silence? I just saw the movie A Man Called Otto, which is based on a movie called, the original, a book as well, A Man Called Uwe, which we actually did in a Lenten film series a few years ago, I think. Debbie Clark covered it, if I remember correctly. But this man is dead inside. And then he realizes when strangers become neighbors, they first annoy him, and then they become friends, and then they become family. And he realizes that he's alive. Which brings us to the second point, to get back up in those difficult times, in the bleak times, and don't let fear stop you. When Jesus says again and again and again, don't be afraid, or the angels say, don't be afraid, they're not saying there is no fear. Fear is very real. They're saying get back up and remember the presence of God in the midst of that fear. Remember the divine. Remember the beauty, the awe, the loving, the faithful, the promising, the kindness, the sacrificial giving of others in this crazy but beautiful universe. Remember our children. When I say our children, I'm not just talking about parents, I'm talking about all of us. Remember our children, all the beautiful, vulnerable people and potential moments of simple, miraculous caretaking, teaching, protecting, hoping, instilling. When you're afraid, get up and walk through it. And this leads to the third point today, to be careful, to take care of your soul. In today's gospel, I wonder when Jesus tells the disciples to keep this a secret for now, I wonder if he was trying to protect them in some way from the harshness and cruelty of the world, of some people. I'm reminded today of the extreme partisan divisions and animosity, the tribalism, the finger pointing. When Jesus talked about secrecy and carefulness, he talked about it a lot. And I think he was trying to protect for good reason. Maybe because of the Romans, for good reason. But the admonition to be wise as serpents and innocent as doves is perhaps guidance to be careful not to put ourselves unnecessarily in harm's way. In other words, to be faithful, but to take care not to endanger ourselves or others, to rise above the despair, to oppose evil, but be smart about it. And part of that care and wisdom is about our prayer lives. How do we sustain our souls, our devotional lives, the practices that keep us, that strengthen us to be hopeful in fighting hatred, in fighting injustice, in fighting apathy in all forms, wisely. Richard Rohr, my favorite Franciscan next to Francis, speaking of eccentrics, wrote a wonderful book called The Naked Now, Learning to See as the Mystics See, the title of which echoes Van Morrison's lyric in the song we just heard at the end. Take me back, he says, in the eternal moment, in the eternal now. And Rohr writes about prayer as not us trying to change God's mind, but rather prayer changing us by the grace of God, the ones who take the time to pray. I want to read to you some lines from that section. He says, the traditional and most universal word to describe a different access to truth was simply, quote, to pray about something, end quote. But that lovely word prayer has been so deadened by pious use and misuse that we now have to describe this different mental attitude with new words. I'm going to introduce a different word here so that you can perceive prayer in a fresh way and perhaps appreciate what we mean by contemplation. The word is resonance. Prayer is actually setting out a tuning fork. All you can really do in the spiritual life is to get tuned to receive the always present message. Once you are tuned, you will receive. It has nothing to do with worthiness or the group you belong to, but only inner resonance and a capacity for mutuality. And he refers to Matthew's gospel about everyone who asks receives. But he continues, prayer is indeed a way to make contact with God, ultimate reality, but it is not an attempt to change God's mind about us or about events. Such attempts are what the secularists make fun of, and rightly so. It is primarily about changing our mind so that things like infinity, mystery, and forgiveness can resound within us. The small mind cannot see great things because the two are in different frequencies or channels, if you will. The big mind can know big things, but we must change channels. Like will know like. In other words, prayer is about trusting, listening, loving, letting go, surrendering honestly to God's presence. And this resonance, this openness, leads to new awareness, understanding, and change. Transfiguration, right? Changing ourselves and changing others around us. In this way, prayer, devotional reading, silence leads us to be more holy indeed in a healthy, whole way. Like Peter, humbled and inspired and able to get up and to be compassionate, to be closer to God's belief and prayer in Him, just as we can become closer to God's belief in us, God's prayer for us. God prays through us. So let me end today with 3 letters. I began with the 3 M's, mystical, miraculous moments. I end with 3 J's, Jesus, joy, and justice. Jesus, joy, and justice. In the opening collect, which we began the service with, we prayed, in beholding by faith the light of Christ's countenance, grant us to be strengthened, to bear our cross, and be changed into His likeness from glory to glory. So we share in God's glory, in God's light. Our cross, friends, is all that we do to remain open to that grace, to be ready to oppose evil and despair, to move through fear, to be changed into Christ's likeness is possible. It is our calling. It is frankly our hope. So we must remember this as truth and as hope, for this is the joyful part of our faith. We are part of the ark towards justice. We are part of the ark of healing. Jesus is the way for us to move from glory to glory, from God's glory to the glorious possibility that human beings, us, with all our self-centered fears and limitations, can be loving, can be compassionate, can be faithful, can be change agents. So let us remember that as our prayer. In the name of Christ, may it be so. And as a meditation after the sermon, I want to play the end of Take Me Back, which points to a beginning. So it ends with these words about mystical, miraculous moments that move us to joy and justice in the name of Jesus. Take me back to the eternal now, in the eternal moment. When you lived in the light, when you lived in the grace, he's almost whispering. And he ends, and the blessing. And the blessing. And boom, the song resolves with resonance like a prayer.